Thank you for having me. I am going to share my screen here. Let's go. Okay. Always want to ask, is it showing?
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Step one done. Get through it. Okay. Hi, everyone. Today I am going to spend some time talking about customer centricity through continuous discovery. This is a high-level presentation, so I'm going to focus a little bit on some past experience in my life and how it's impacted what I do day to day at Oracle. So to get started, I want everyone to kind of think about everything that you've learned about measuring and understanding your customers' needs and wants. And I want you to kind of push that to the side and kind of open up your brain just to think about things a little differently, because I'm going to walk you through a couple situations I've had through my life that has allowed me to apply my day-to-day experiences to how I actually really understand customers today. So to get started, let's talk about how much do you really know your customers? Do you think that you're doing a really good job in fulfilling their expectations? And when you think about this, usually my first response is, yeah, I know my customers pretty well. Well, let's think about that a bit. So a recent study from PwC showed that we clearly still have some room to grow in this area. So basically, I started off by saying that, PwC came out with a study where it is showing about a 50% gap in customer experience. And this intensive customer focus has increased as technology-enabled transparency and online social media accelerate an inexorable flow of market power downstream from suppliers to customers, with our customers having more control over their buying patterns and making the decisions before they even get in touch with the vendor or the product company. Now every company of any scale and in any sector wants to be closer to their customers. They need to understand them more deeply and tailor their products and services to serve them more precisely. And in order to do this, you need to have a lot of curiosity and persistency to continuously evolve together with your customers. So this level of curiosity and persistence started for me at the age of 4. Now, most of y'all are probably thinking, what the heck was Angela doing at the age of 4 that started her on this path and that impacts how she manages through her career today? Well, let me share with you. At the age of 4, I started training to become a figure skater. And most of my years growing up, I either spent anywhere from 4 to 7 days at the rink, and on any given day, I was there 2 to 8 hours. And I guess you would say I was a bit dedicated to the sport. In fact, today, pre-COVID, you would typically find me in an ice rink at least 1 day a week, lacing up my boots and going for a spin, literally. By the age 18, I decided to take my sport, my hobby, and turn it into a career. And I turned pro and started skating in shows for a living. You see, I was a good skater. I wasn't a great skater. And what I mean is I wasn't Olympic material. My highest ranking was in the 30s on a national scale. To be an Olympian, you need to be in the top 10, if not in the top 3 to 6. So I was nowhere close to being in the Olympics. But there was one thing that I had going for me, and that was I was good and I was consistently good, meaning that I had a series of jump, spins, and footwork in my repertoire that I would go to on a regular basis, and I could, without a shadow of doubt, execute precisely. And my accuracy rating was in the high 90 percentile. So it was very predictable. And on top of that, I was a bit entertaining too. So people typically ask me, how did skating translate into what you're doing today with customer marketing and measurement? And how did I take what I did as a skater and apply that? Where's the similarities? So during my days as a skater, I basically came away with 5 key valuable lessons. And the first one was science and math. And I learned at an early age how to use science and math to drive a creative output. So during my training days, I would spend time in between skating sessions on the side of the ice, actually calculating my performance. Back then, we didn't have the technology that we have today. Not necessarily going to tell you how old I am, but it was before cell phones, even before the bag phone that we had, before pagers. We did not have, the ability to tape on demand and play back. We did tape our sessions, but you had to get the tape developed, VHS, and then go watch it later. So nothing was real time. We did have a Polaroid camera. So if y'all remember the Polaroid, that was my on-demand tool. I do believe they're coming back as a trend item right now. But besides the Polaroid, I had a couple other tools. I had a notebook, I had a pencil, calculator, ruler. I even had a compass and a protractor. And I would sit on the side of the ice and I would calculate, create formulas on how to become a better skater. So one of my favorite jumps is a double axel. And I would sit on the side of the rink and I would figure out what the constants and variables were in the equation. So I knew my weight, I knew my height. I would calculate the speed I needed to go into the jump. I would manage through the time needed to actually pull in and complete the revolutions, and how I needed to count through the time in the air to the minute that my right foot touched the ground to land the perfect jump. And I would sit there and I would calculate and draw this out. So I perfected this, probably more so than I did my tricks on the ice. And I got to the point where if a calculation was off, I knew my jump or spin was going to be off. So I spent just as much time on the ice as I did off the ice, using geometry, trig, physics to figure out how to become a better skater. The second lesson that I learned was how to apply audience feedback. So I learned early in my life that processing this feedback was going to be a differentiator for me. My first real competition was in Hayward, California at the age of 6. And I remember that during the performance, my most difficult jump was near the beginning. Typically, you try to put your most difficult tricks in the first 30 seconds of your program so that you can get through. You have the strength to move through it. And that was no different for me at the age of 6. The challenge was that at this time, this jump, I only landed about 50% of the time. So 1 out of 2, I was going to be successful. Well, this day, it happened to be one of those successful days, and I landed the jump. And I remember when I landed the jump, I looked up into the stands. I could see my family cheering and standing up and applauding. And then when I finished my entire performance, I remember looking into the crowd and everybody was standing and cheering for me, and I was getting an ovation. And at that moment, it was such a critical, memorable moment for me. And I realized the audience had an impact on the type of performance I was doing. And the feedback that they were delivering was going to set the path for me on future performances. I not only needed to execute what I was doing on a technical merit, but I needed to entertain my customer, who was the audience. So when my sport turned into a career, I realized the power of the audience. And essentially, they were my customer, and listening to their feedback and following through with what they wanted was an easy route to satisfy not only them, but my boss, which was the company, and be able to stay gainfully employed, which was pretty important to me at the moment. And I realized that there were multiple ways to get that feedback. One way was, through the applause and the ovation. But also, we would conduct surveys. We would have focus groups. We would also have meet and greets after different events in different cities where we would meet with the audience. They would come back and they would tell us what they felt and how they thought about our performance. And it was during those meet and greets that I realized that satisfaction comes in multiple levels of scoring. So when we look at NPS today, and someone is showing up as a promoter, and they're showing out a promoter at 9, their experience is impacting that score. They've given me a 9, and they're telling us that our company is at the level of performance they want. But as we start having conversations with them, and I learned this in skating, that there's a lot that is supporting that opinion they have of us. And a lot of it is tied to them personally. And the end result is a number, and not all numbers are created equal. And I learned that using multiple ways of driving audience feedback helped me understand how to average and blend them out. So the next lesson is focused around emotion. And I learned through my sport that I could perform the most technically perfect program when I was a competitive skater and not win the competition. And there's only a few sports out there that are mainstream where this occurs. Gymnastics used to be one like this. And I realized the technical piece, me sitting on the side of the road, on the side of the ice and calculating, trajectory of a jump and the velocity and speed that I need to enter that jump, and being able to get that down to a precision and really understand how to activate that within my time on the ice was really important. But if I didn't connect with my audience and I didn't understand what their expectations were in my performance, be the audience or the judges in a competitive situation, then I was not going to win. I was not going to gain the mindset of the customer, my audience. And I was not going to put a perfect score out there. This became even more evident when I became a professional skater. That connection to the audience was so much more important than actually technically executing every trick to precise precision. So going through this as my first career, I'm really spending a lot of time every day training, prepping for it. You think you've got everything covered, just like, 5 minutes ago, my internet goes down. Never had a problem with my internet. Goes down today when I'm doing a keynote. Basically shows you that there's truth in the matter that unpredictable things can happen. So when that happens, you always need to have a plan B. There always needs to be something as a follow-up. So this is the 4th lesson that I learned in figure skating, to plan for the unpredictable. In skating, when you are performing, you never know if you need to improvise until you are in the moment. Every jump, spin, trick you do, and a program gives you a series of scores and technical points. If you miss an element early in your program, you typically will try to improvise and put another element in the end so that you can make up that point deficit before you step off the ice. This is also true in a show entertainment arena. A lot of times within a performance, you have ways of getting the crowd involved with what you're doing. You'll have people, stand up and start clapping with the music, or there's some type of engagement. And as you continue to do this routine, you know where these moments of interaction typically are. So when you're on the ice, you can't just be thinking about yourself. You've got to be thinking about how you're engaging with your audience or your customer and how you can pull them in. So a lot of times that requires that you need to be able to improvise. Having spent a couple decades always knowing I needed to have a backup plan, eventually prepared me for what was to happen next, which was a career-ending injury in my mid-20s. So the last lesson that I really learned during my skating days is focused around curiosity. In order to stay relevant in an artistic sport, you always have to be thinking about what you can do different to make sure you stand out among the crowd. And I found that the best way to achieve this was to constantly be listening, observing, and open to discovering new things and new ways to think about them that were not necessarily the logical approach that you would take. For me, I set this path by using the scientific method and continuous discovery to produce creative outputs. When I was 10 years old, I was the only one on the side of the ice mapping out my figures with a compass and a protractor. When I was in my teens, I was the only one with a calculus, a physics, and a geometry book by my side as I was running through formulas to figure out how to precisely execute my doubles and triples. This was not the normal approach. I was teased quite a bit about it, but in my rink, I was one of two people that made a career out of skating. So if I dig into this a little bit more and talk about continuous discovery, what does that actually mean to me holistically? Well, continuous discovery is a process that helps teams, and it's predominantly been started in product teams, evolve and refine their ideas based on customer needs so that the output delivers more value. And I know this is something that you live through on a regular basis with doing customer listening and measurement. For me, it is all about seeking the desired outcome by conducting small research activities with the customers frequently. And the key word here is frequently. This is not a one and done activity, and it's a never ending process. So it needs to be a continuous cycle that you go through. So if I fast forward into my marketing career, as I mentioned earlier, I had a short-lived career in professional skating. I cracked my kneecap, which basically ended my ability to be consistently good. And that's what allowed me to be that professional skater in shows, is that I was predictable and I was good enough at what I executed. So I had to move to my plan B. My plan B was marketing. After spending a couple of years at marketing agencies, I parlayed my career into working for a business intelligence company called Brio out in the Bay Area. And I was at Brio during the dot-com boom, which was incredible, and then also during the bust, which was very eye-opening. And during this time, it really began to click for me how I use these different tools and techniques during skating and how that could apply to my everyday working environment. I realized that I could actually help my company, Brio, help our customers by being able to rationalize data through visualizations to help our customers monetize what they had previously seen as being non-measurable or abstract. So when I was at Brio, there were three main players, and some of you might recall this if you date back this far. This was in the mid to late 90s. The three main players in the space were Brio, Business Objects, and Cognos. They've all been acquired since this time. Brio is now part of Oracle. Business Objects became part of SAP, and Cognos part of IBM. Brio was the underdog of the three, and the technology was built for the end user. So being a query and analysis tool, you typically had to understand how to write SQL, write queries. With Brio, it was a WYSIWYG, drag and drop type of technology. And it was one of the first on the market that allowed a non-technical data warehouse, DBA, to be able to manage query and analysis. So it was built for the end user. Within my 4th year at the company, I was heading up corporate marketing, and part of my responsibilities was field marketing. And as we were developing our plans for the year, I started working with the team to conduct a series of customer focus groups, as well as we were engaging in other types of community listening activities. And through these activities, one common theme started to develop that we were hearing over and over. And that theme was Brio's a toy company. You see, our competitors were telling our prospects and customers that Brio was not a sophisticated technology and that we were child's play. And at the time, there was this company called Brio Toys based out of Sweden. You might have heard about them. They're a popular toy for young kids. They're a wooden toy, as you see on the screen here. The company was started in the 1800s, and they're still around today. Knowing a little bit about the company, I decided, why don't we turn this negative narrative into a positive? Because I was hearing it over and over again, and during the customer interviews. So I reached out to a local sales rep that we had in Sweden, and we set up a plan to go after Brio Toys and engage them as a customer. But the goal wasn't just to get them as a customer. It was to create an experience so phenomenal for them that they would want to become an advocate for Brio technology. So we worked on this plan, worked with them as a partner, being Brio Toys. And within 12 months, we were able to get them as a customer. And Brio ended up managing Brio, and we gave them the ability to use predictive analysis for the first time. This is the first time they've ever embraced any tool or used any measurement across the organization. So by taking the opportunity to take the negative feedback and creatively look at ways that we could turn that, flip it, we were able to create an incredible customer and experience. And in turn, we were able to create a competitive switch campaign called Brio at Brio. And we ended up moving a lot of the companies that had been experiencing this fodder of Brio's just a toy company over to being Brio customers. We had about a 70% conversion rate, which was pretty incredible at that time. So the next example I want to share with you is a little more recent in my career, where the techniques of continuous discovery help guide us to the right solution. And that's at Nustar. At Nustar, I was hired to increase the brand awareness and ultimately the overall brand equity for the company. This was back in 2014. And the company at the time was going through a transformation. They had just found out that they were going to lose a major government contract. And this government contract actually was a big portion of their annual revenue. And it was a very distinct piece of technology. Well, with losing the government contract, and some of you might know it, it's Number Portability Act. So if you have a cell phone with Verizon and you want to port your number over to Sprint, basically change your service to Sprint and keep your telephone number, The only reason you could do that was because of Nustar. And Nustar lost this contract to another provider in the space that who now manages this ability to do this type of port. Because of this, there was 2 years, basically the company had 2 years to transfer this big portion of their business over to this competitor. And due to the nature of the business, when I evaluated the brand equity value, most of the brand value was in this piece of technology. So the CEO at Nustar was pretty smart, real sharp cookie. She decided, before even knowing that she was going to lose the government contract, to start preparing for a plan B. She went out on a buying spree, and within 12 months, she purchased 11 companies. And all 11 companies had complementary technology to support the rest of the technology that was in the Nustar portfolio. And the only major challenge was that the individual brands that were acquired had a stronger brand equity value than the remaining pieces of the Nustar technology that was going to stay after the government contract left. So this is where I came in. I was hired to move that equity value into industry range. And in 2004, the industry range for technology was around 27. So to give you some type of context of what this value means, if you're looking at, say, a popular consumer brand, say Range Rover or Apple, you would anticipate the value being in the 80s or plus. For technology, like an IBM or an Oracle or a Nustar, you're looking at a value between 25 and 30 would be a comfortable range. So we were shooting for 27. When we looked at the current value for the Nustar only brand, it was relatively low. When we added the acquisitions into it, the score went up to 16. 16 targets 27, still quite a distance. Usually when you're moving a brand value score up 1 to 2 points is considered a challenge. I was looking at moving it 10 to 11 points. So much more of a challenge. So the first thing I had to do was start looking for the low-hanging fruit. Where were there opportunities for us to move the needle as fast as possible and get the biggest bang or uplift in this score value? So we started looking at the data. I had a team of data scientists, and I had them look at customer data first. And my directive was, find me anomalies and trends where within the customer engagement with our brand overall. And while the team was analyzing the data, I in turn started interviewing customers and prospects. Again, engaging with them on a one-to-one to try to figure out really how they felt about the experience and the engagement with the Nustar brand. So during my interviews, I spent some time and I would ask the customers a series of questions around brand positioning. And I would also show them some content, very, very typical process. And most of that content would be centered around ads and other types of marketing literature. And on a few occasions, I would hear, I don't understand what you want from me. I can't see it. And I started hearing this over and over again. And when you hear the same words coming from different people, you have a tendency to take note and try to research and unpack that a bit to understand what that really means for these people. Do they have the same meaning, or are they just choosing the same words because of environmental or other types of indicators, impacting their decisions? So a little more context on the customers. 80% of our customers at Nustar within these areas were male and between the age of 35 to 55. Within that age range, anywhere between 10 to 12% have some type of red-green color blindness. Well, all our call to actions in our ads and other educational and marketing materials had these red and green stripes. So at least 10% of the populations that were receiving these ads, both in a digital and print environment, could not see our call to action. So to give you a bit of context of what this meant in value, we were losing $500,000 per quarter just because people could not see the strong message, the call to action in our ads. That was just our ads alone. So what did we do? So we changed the brand colors. And usually when you go into your CEO or your CMO and you say, I want to make a brand color change, it becomes a very subjective conversation, because brand, especially verbal and visual identity systems, in the past have not really been monetized and a direct correlation to a number. When you go in and say, I'm losing $2 million a year just in advertising spend because people can't see our call to actions, and this is overall impacting our brand equity value, and this is what it's going to cost us to continue with the current color palette to be able to offset that, people get really quiet and start listening. So within a 15-minute conversation, we had moved from a red-green primary color palette to a green-yellow citron. We made some other changes when we went through this. Again, I was looking for low-hanging fruit, and this was the first one, was to change the brand colors. But we also changed some of our positioning, our messaging. We made it more simple. We listened to our customers and really understood what they wanted from emotional connection. We changed our messages here. We made them relatable. The people that you see on these ads were our customers, or they were part of our customers' ecosystem, being personal or in the business professional working environment. So we were able to move the brand value score from 16 to 25 in less than a year. Remember, I told you 1 to 2 points was considered a considerable needle move. We were able to do a bit more than that. We were also able to increase our customer satisfaction by 30% within that first year. And the main reason for doing so is we listened to our customers and we put in place the top 4 things that they had suggested during our feedback loops within our customer support process. And that had a huge impact on how they engaged with us and how they saw the experience. We were also within that first year, instead of losing the $500,000 per quarter in advertising, we were able to push those conversions into the black and actually yield a positive return. So how does all this apply today? Well, today, this has intensified even further through the pandemic we're going through on a global scale. We're all feeling it. It's something that we've been talking about quite a bit over the last 6 months. From one day to another, everything just turned digitally. And with that, consumer behavior changed as well. So I was just thinking about this the other day. How many of us were thinking, I will do all my grocery shopping online and have all my groceries delivered to my doorstep a year ago? I mean, I was an Amazon shopper, but now we have packages coming to the house daily, where it used to be once a month type thing. Home offices, homeschooling. We've all adapted to the new environment. And with this has come different requirements from our customers on their expectations of how they're going to do business with us. Besides just moving to a digital world, another aspect that a recent McKinsey study has highlighted is that people are more mindful where and how they spend their money, and that this applies to businesses as well. So every time there is a major shift in our economy, we look at 9/11, we look at the financial crisis, to looking at the pandemic, everybody becomes more sensitive to how they buy. And the requirements and the characteristics and who they do business with changes. And it's not always predictable, meaning that we cannot use the historical data to tell us exactly where we need to go next. So we have to look at new techniques. Also, it's really important at this point that you can take some of these concepts that you've used in the past, like continuous discovery, and apply them to how you're viewing what is going on in the current state. And one thing to think about is, before today, even with the changes in the buyer behaviors, we at least had a couple chances of convincing a customer or a person to become a customer. Or if we failed the customer's expectation in any way, we had a couple chances to get it right. With the change in the environment and the mindset now, we really only have one chance. And that's because everyone's attention span is really decreasing. So you need to be more customer centric. You have to be crisp and very clear with what you deliver to your customer, the value. And you have to provide a service level higher than anyone has ever delivered in the past. The expectations are extremely high now. And to make it through this pandemic or any other type of, economical crisis situation, the companies that make it through, ones that have the resilience, will actually be the ones that are successful through the journey. And there's a couple things that I'd like to note that you really need to think about today as it applies to today's situation. The first is always start with your data. Let it be your guide. The data doesn't lie. How you interpret the data can change according to the techniques and tools that you're using, but start there and always be mindful of where the customer sits within your data play. The second is show empathy. When we look at data, we have a tendency to look at it in black and white and see maybe shades of gray there. But when we're working with products and people, sometimes we forget that they are people and they're human and that there is a connection. We need to make sure that the connection shows through and can be interpreted through the data. The next one is that you need to see your customer as your partner, not as someone that just buys your product. You need to nurture long-lasting relationships, and you need to understand them on a human level. This will be the differentiator for the companies of tomorrow. So in closing, if you remember in the beginning, I kind of dropped off for a moment or two, I had asked everyone to think about things as slightly different, to think about what you've learned about modeling customers, understanding how to really measure their experience and what their expectations are, and use those same approaches, but just think about how you apply them differently. So let me leave you with a couple final thoughts here. First one, customer centricity and continuous discovery is about connecting the dots and enabling you to think differently with your customers, not about your customers, but as a partner with your customers. And if you think back to the examples that I've given you, both in my skating career and also in my technology career as a marketer, one common theme is that even though I lead with the data, I always find out where the emotional connection resides, how it ties back to the human element. In B2B, that is a way to set us aside from other companies and differentiate, is really understanding what is the emotional driver for our customers and what their expectations are as you as a partner. Also, again, use the numbers to guide you through intense discovery but do so in a respectful way. We have more data at our fingertips than ever before, and there is a fine line in being able to show your customers that you are predictive and you can predict their next thought and be able to make life easier for them versus being creepy and feeling like you're stalking them. There is a very fine line on privacy and PII, and you need to be able to understand how you manage through that within your organization. Also, there's quite a bit of power in mapping art, science, and math together. There are three legs to a same stool. And if you can balance these and figure out the right equations with the constants and variables mapped out, then you deliver the most incredible and powerful outcome. And then last, when you need to have, I think when I came into Vi's presentation, he was talking about a constant feedback loop. You always have to be on. You always have to have that mentality. And you always need to have a closed loop process. You need to always be listening to your customers all the time. And it's so important to have this constant feedback loop in place. But you also need to put your customers first. Always. They're your priority. They're the reason we're in business. And without our customers, we wouldn't have a business. So lead with them. Use them to guide you where you need to go next. So that is it for my presentation today. So I appreciate QuestionPro giving me the opportunity to share my story with you. And I don't know if we have any questions.
We do. I have a question. Angela, thank you so much. First of all, on behalf of QuestionPro, thanks a lot for sharing your story. I do have a question. I was fascinated with the Nustar conversation. When you came in, you said like, okay, we needed to improve brand equity, and you talked to a bunch of customers. Can you help us understand how much of qualitative versus quantitative modeling you did? Like in terms of like, okay, we need to increase brand equity. There was some quantitative model, but also you kind of picked up the phone and talked to a bunch of customers. So it's more qualitative, kind of like really engaging with them. Can you help all of us understand like what ratio, how did you go about thinking through that process in terms of how much to spend on qual versus quant effectively?
So I spent it was probably about a 65, 70, 30% split. Meaning on the quantitative, I always lead with the data. So besides looking at the customer data, we really looked at the revenue and by products, and then we analyzed the acquisition brands. So some of those brands, they were small companies, but had incredible lift in their brand equity and awareness through these communities. And when we were integrating those companies into Nustar, under the Nustar being the umbrella brand, I didn't want to lose that equity value. So even though the blended rate was 16, some of these companies had 30, 35% equity values. And I wanted to be able to offset that. So the data was very key for me to understand where I pushed and where I pulled with the technology layers around the company. From there, I started looking at customers, and on a qualitative perspective, the interviews were focused on both when I was looking at promoters, detractors, and then also the passive. And the passive was a key area that we were focused on, where they weren't making any movement. So when we lost this government contract, they weren't our basic end users. I mean, the government contract had 11 companies that we sold to. They were telco companies around the world. And there wasn't really need to have brand awareness outside that market. It was pretty inclusive in a sense, exclusive, I mean. So with the others, how to figure out how do we move the passive into a promoter, or what's going to impact them where they go into a detractor. And that's what led the conversations. And as we started drilling down, this anomaly came up because I kept hearing this feedback of, I don't know what you want from us. And that to me was just a random comment that I was starting to see trend over and over in our studies. And it made enough of impression on me where I had the team start looking into it and really looking at the personas going across the org, and then looking at how how people were clicking on our content online and how they were interacting with it, when they bounced off of it, with advertisement, what type of call through we were getting. So the data really, from a quantitative perspective, really drove the conversations.
Got it. Got it. Makes sense. I really like the idea of like drilling down into the passives. Really, I mean, everybody kind of goes on both sides, but really drilling down why are they in that position, and then what are the drivers for them to move up, and what are the stop drivers for them to obviously move down effectively. That is absolutely fascinating. A couple other questions that have come up. By the way, do we have time for questions? At least one or two more questions, then?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think, Angela, when you integrated all those companies as part of Nustar, did you kind of actively, I'm just more really curious, did you actively look for companies with higher brand equity? Because that was the goal of kind of getting the, cumulative brand equity up and running at higher kind of brand, would you actively look out for those kind of companies and acquire them? Was that a strategy?
So that was not the strategy. The brand equity was not the strategy. So Lisa Hook, the CEO, and phenomenal CEO, had her strategic direction was, I'm going to find technology that's going to be easy to integrate with my current portfolio that's staying. And I want to be able to look at opportunities where I can leapfrog in product development. Brand equity wasn't a calculation of brand equity, wasn't anything the company did until I joined. And when I joined as a consultant at first, because I was called and said, hey, will you come in and increase the brand awareness for this company? And at that time, I knew Nustar because I had worked for one of those 11 companies that was acquired. And when when Nustar acquired them, I started watching them more because my stock became reality at that point. So I had a personal interest in them, but I didn't know enough about the opportunity, whether I could really move the needle. And it wasn't until I really did the equity study and started seeing where the values hit and how I could move the needle up through different monetization tactics that I turned into a full-time employee for them. But after coming in, part of my job was educating the rest of the company that you can take very abstract things. People see brand, and a lot of times they think of brand as that's my color palette or tchotchkes or, event giveaways. It's so much more than that. And that there is a value you can associate to it. That's typically why I start with the quant first. Right. And then I offset with qual.
Got it.